Jason Wilson, but unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, he can't be here with us today. So instead, we have someone who's been working on the project with him, the Narran Lakes project, and her name is Karen Perusian. So I might just say a little bit about Jason first, just so you know where it's coming from. So Jason is an Aboriginal man. He's from the Kennedy, Morgan, Peters families, and his grandfather's cut language is Gamilaroi, which is from the Barwon River and northwest New South Wales. And his grandmother's country is Uluru, which is the Narran River and northwest New South Wales. So it's in the Murray-Darling Basin. He's worked with fisheries at state and federal level to incorporate Aboriginal values into water initiatives and has helped empower Murray, Lower Darling Rivers, Indigenous nations and Northern Basin Aboriginal Nation and the Commonwealth Environmental Water Office as an engagement officer. So he's worked around the issue of water and cultural values for a very long time. He currently enjoys chairing the Narran Lakes Joint Management Committee with the Office of Environment and Heritage tackling climate change adaptation. So obviously he loves his country and family and has dedicated his life to stop what he sees as the intergenerational, cultural and spiritual and economic genocide. He wants to provide equity for Aboriginal people. So today, though, we have Karen Perusian, who has been working with Jason on this project. She lives and works on the traditional lands of the Wongal people here near Sydney at the Cooks River, and she has qualifications in social science, adult education, and a master's degree in sustainable heritage development from ANU. She's got 20 years' experience working as a senior community engagement officer with the New South Wales Department of Planning and Environment, and she works collaboratively with colleagues and stakeholders to ensure positive outcomes for communities. Since 2019, Karen has worked on this project, the Climate Change Adaptation Aboriginal Cultural Values Project, and the purpose of the project is to work with Aboriginal communities to develop strategies to reduce impact on their cultural practices and cultural values. This project respects Aboriginal traditional knowledge, innovation and practices, and Aboriginal people are involved in all the decision making in the project. So the stories that are told belong to those Aboriginal communities and individuals who pass on those stories to her or to Jason in this project. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Karen, who's going to try and do one of those things that we all dread to do, step into someone else's shoes and talk about this project.
So before we start, I'd like to acknowledge country. Jason's written this acknowledgement, but I'd also like to acknowledge the ancestral owners of this land and the Aboriginal nations that call Sydney and Narran Lakes their home. And I'd also like to pay my respects to the elders, both past, present, from these nations, and extend that respect to other Indigenous peoples who've joined us here today at this workshop. And as you know, I've been asked to present on Jason's behalf, so I'm a bit nervous. And as he's actually very unwell, I did speak to him and you could hardly understand what he was saying because he's lost his voice. But he wanted me to tell you that he's really sorry that he can't be here today, but I will do my best to tell you about my work with Jason since 2019, considering adaptation decision-making around climate change and working together to reduce impacts on their cultural practice and cultural values. I'm grateful for the trust that Jason's put in me, and I hope I can do it justice. So where is Narran Lake Nature Reserve? So it's out west, I guess the closest town is Lightning Ridge, so if people know Western New South Wales, and you'll be able to see some beautiful footage during the video and a flyover drone footage a bit later in the presentation. And there's Jason out on country. So firstly, a bit of background about how we got here. This is a slide from a presentation by Jason and my colleague, Polly Mitchell, for ICOMOS, a webinar actually, back in 2021, where they presented a webinar about this project that I'm talking about today, Climate Change Adaptation for Aboriginal Cultural Values. The purpose of the project was to increase the capacity of New South Wales Aboriginal communities to be able to discuss and consider adaptation decision-making around climate change and to enable those communities to develop strategies to reduce impacts on their cultural practice and cultural values. I worked with 2 other teams in the Department of Planning and Environment, the Cultural Ecosystem Adaptation Team, which Polly is from, and the Cultural Science Team, Mal Ridges. And apparently he's presenting a paper later in the week, if you want to look out for him, about cultural science. And he's a really good speaker if you see him on the program. So one of the first things we did was to establish a steering group and we considered our principles and our way of working with Aboriginal communities. And it was decided where possible the project was to be community-led. And a non-negotiable part of the project has been to acknowledge and to respect Aboriginal traditional knowledge, innovations and practices, and that Aboriginal people are involved in the decision-making process about what they want to do about impacts of climate change on country. And I also want to emphasise that we made a decision to make sure we complied with any restrictions on using and dealing with any Australian Aboriginal cultural or intellectual property as part of the project, and ensured that the contributions of any Aboriginal communities was acknowledged. Any stories that were told belong to and remain the cultural and intellectual property of that community. The video that I'll show you in a little while is an example of this. It was actually made by community for their own purposes. And we were very careful about any acknowledgement in the stories that were told, and that they were happy to have that shown. The adaptation pathways map that we used in workshops that we ran with communities was adapted from an adaptation planning tool. I think Polly and Jason probably spoke at the webinar a bit more about this. We'd used it a few years earlier with National Park staff. I understand that might be some National Park staff from interstate at this in this workshop. Hello. And so you might be interested in talking to me later about those workshops that we ran with staff. The idea was for staff to be able to identify values on park. For example, it could be assets or plants, but also cultural heritage, and then to explore adaptive pathways and to do a risk assessment for those values. And apparently there is a whole strategic plan that New South Wales National Parks has that came out of those workshops. So we'd initially decided to trial different Aboriginal organisations with this model and ways of working about looking at climate change, including local Aboriginal land councils and traditional owner groups. But when COVID hit in 2020, it became too difficult to work online with some of the groups who we didn't have existing relationships with. And so we ended up working with 2 Aboriginal joint management committees. I don't know, maybe if I there's different models across the state, but the idea is that Aboriginal communities in the local area have input into the management of parks. And some of them have been handed back, others not so. But the idea is also that we're moving towards that for all of our national parks. So that when we say that Jason's the chair of the Joint Management Committee, that's what we're talking about. So we worked with 2 joint management committees, Narran Lakes and Warramai Conservation Lands, which is near Newcastle. I was thinking if I was talking a bit more about the work that was done there, we'd certainly be talking about eastern, like sea level rise and storms and things a lot more. When we're talking inland, it's a lot different impacts, but the idea was that we actually wanted to look at different landscapes. So talking about Narran, the predicted climate change at Narran is less rainfall, longer and more severe droughts, more extreme heat waves, higher risk of frost in winter, flooding less frequent and smaller, which become obvious why that's a problem in terms of the plants out there, and exacerbated damage to country from extreme weather events, also flora and fauna diversity loss, and as Jason referred to in his bio, intergenerational cultural genocide, which when I show the video, you'll see them talking a bit about that as well. So in 2019, Mal Ridges and I travelled out to Narran Lakes to hold the first workshop with the Narran Lakes Joint Management Committee and community members from Lightning Ridge. We use the adaptation pathways, the model that I was referring to earlier, to discuss options for the management of cultural heritage values at Narran Lakes. The workshop began with the question, what are the things, values that concern you in the reserve that are at risk from climate change? You can see that's Jason on the floor there, looking at the map when they were deciding about what they were going to want to talk about. The group decided to talk about lignum, a native ground cover that's used for cultural practices, weaving, and food, as well as a base for ibis nests. It was interesting talking about their sacred ibis. They're not bin chickens. So that comment this morning. Climate change is likely to mean less rainfall, which means lignum would be patchy and dry and not suitable for weaving or for eating. And with longer times between rain events and variations in seasonal changes like less spring rain, there were concerns about the climatic impact on the lignum. So that was the value that they chose to talk about. So it was obviously it's only one thing, but it led to a whole lot of discussions about other broader things that they needed to be concerned about. So we used the risk matrix to identify its current risk. So yeah, as it says up on there on the slide, lignum is important for food and fibre. It's part of many cultural activities. Without flooding, it dies. The current risk to lignum is low in terms of the current weather patterns, but this will change over time because we looked at what's currently the risk and also what will be the risk in 20 years' time. And while there's enough lignum available for cultural practices now, we need to plan for when there may not be. So next I was going to show this video, which is what I've referred to earlier, that was made with community out at Narran in 2021, and I think it'll speak for itself.
You know, Uahdara country's in the dead centre of the northern basin in the Murray-Darling, and so the biggest impact, I think, that climate change is impacting our country is obviously through drought, through prolonged drought. So over the last 20 years, we've had 2 really significant droughts, and you can see the pine behind us, the native cypress pine, that the last drought has taken care of that and destroyed it all. So hotter summers, less rainfall, both here and generally in the basin as well. It really presents a very real threat, I guess, to our country. I think the greatest resilient trait, I guess the greatest kind of protective factor that our people have, like all Aboriginal people around Australia, is each other. You know, so we just kind of come together and support each other. We are people and peoples who have lived through climate change on this continent before. People have stories of that. We've got stories of climate change events and changing landscape out here. And so, you know, from those stories, we know that our people have lived through it before, have persevered and come out much richer on the other side. And I think now, whilst a threat to the way we know and enjoy our cultural livelihoods at the moment, there's opportunity for us to come together once more and to support each other through this time and yeah, sort of just make sure we bring our kids on that journey as well, make sure they see it, because they're going to see the impacts of climate change much longer than we are.
I don't think that one worked. Can I have another one?
So we've got our midden over there. Look.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Mate, you want to do the pippy dance?
Yeah.
They coming next.
New side. New side.
Daddy? Enough for you?
Every time you go in that way.
Hello everyone. Welcome to Garia.
Some tribes got different stories. And he made it this far. You notice he only got 3 legs. They wounded him when they found him in the river. They chased him this far. Some tribes said they killed him here. But some old friends of mine said they killed him in the Barwon River. And he went down one of the springs here and they knew where he was going to surface. So that wherever they killed him, they got the 2 girls out and laid them on the ant bed. That's a Dreamtime story of the old people, and brought them back to life. And down on the river there is a big ant hill down there.
So as we know, the Narran River, it's a windy river. So when them 2 wives were taken by those crocodiles, Amy came back and his wives weren't there, and he realised the crocodiles have taken his wives. But he had to stop and think. How am I going to catch up to these crocodiles? They're ahead of me. So what he thought about was the river being windy. So he cut across the bends of the river, straight across. So that got him out in front of the crocodiles to rescue his wives. But the story that Al told, there's lessons in these stories. Buragu, we call our stories, our dreaming stories. To stop and think about circumstances, not go straight into things and rush into things where things can go wrong. But also, you know, the relationship with men and women, looking after one another. He was worried about his wives, so he hunted those crocodiles down to get his wives back. Me and Jeff Simpson was here one day, and Jeff said, get the tape there, sis. We're going to do a crocodile. And so we had picked up some sticks around. We never drew anything. We just went with where that tape was taking us. And this is where this crocodile came to be. But we didn't realise the crocodile, or Garia, was facing to where Cuddy Springs is, where those giant megafauna bones were found. While we're using the stones, like doing stone arrangements out here, like you were up at Engledool the other day, there were stone arrangements there from our old people. So we're carrying on the tradition of stone arrangements. So that's why this crocodile, or Garia, is here today, so we can carry on those teachings, and for our young people, so they can carry on the teaching and so forth. So I think, do we leave the culture in the past and not grow with it? Or do we pick up and continue our culture by doing stone arrangements like we have here with Garia? So that was the purpose of this crocodile, and to tell our story and use it as a teaching tool. So the stones we ask you to pick up, or an object, if you can place that wherever around the crocodile or Garia, maybe a blessing while you place that object around the stone arrangement or on the stone arrangement. We want you to leave your spirit here with us, or part of your spirit here with us. So you will always be a part of this country with us. And as much as we go with you in spirit, with country to your country. So when you place that object or stone down, or shell or whatever, or for yourself, your family, or for country out here, or just a beautiful thought, to leave something positive and with our Garia, our country, and you'll always be a part of this country by placing that stone or object here on Garia, and you'll stay with us. A part of your spirit will stay with us. Thank you.
Climate change is real. I think being here and being a 50-year-old male on my country and learning from my elders for a long period of time, and having that opportunity to continue to come here over that 50-year period, you know, like I might have known the early parts of my life, but certainly when I was starting to be 7 and recognising why my grandparents and my uncles and aunties brought me out here, you can still see that big change that is occurring on this place. You know, like the water in particular. It's incredible how much water has left this beautiful lake. We don't have a great deal of control. There's no regulated river here. We can't turn a tap on, and certainly some of those global type of trends of landscapes are getting drier. It's a worry when you've got a place that's solely depending on water to come in and do its business here. And we have seen in the last 10 to 15 years availability of water decrease. It's a real challenge when you've got landscapes that are drying out, and because not only the droughts are getting longer and harder and hotter, that sort of whole process again exacerbates the delivery of water into this place. When my son was born 12 years ago, Narran only filled a couple of times, and through that period we're sitting on this beautiful shell midden here. This shells and the mussels need a couple of years to grow, and when the water comes in it dries up too quickly. So in that period that he's turned into a young man, I have not had the opportunity to harvest the mussels to add to these beautiful middens up here and teach him his culture. So that's not only cultural genocide, that's a process whereby I can't continue to pass on what I've learnt. So there's climate change impact, but there's so much cultural impacts in amongst that. And not only the impacts to water, it's also the vegetation in here. You see those birds not appearing, not having those big opportunities to nest, but also, I can't harvest those eggs. I don't have that opportunity to do that or pass that knowledge on. So the impacts are real for Aboriginal people, and I think it hits a bit harder when you know that you rely on that country to provide you with the resources that it's done for millennia.
Pretty amazing film, hey. I wanted to acknowledge the filmmaker Vera Hong. She did a terrific job, and also was really good about making sure that all of that was checked over and over with everybody that appeared in that video, and making sure that they were happy for those stories to be told and be recorded. So, reducing the impacts of climate change. It was referred to in the video about cultural practices and being able to go out on country and to be able to teach the younger ones. One of the key decisions that was made as a result of the discussions during the workshop initially was that the open day that they usually have out at Narran Lakes should be changed so that it's in winter, in July, rather than in October, which it was previously, because there's a risk of health from heat to a risk to elders' health from the heat. And I think that that's something that's going to be even more consideration in the years to come out west. Like, even to be able to live out there is going to become more and more difficult. And then you could see in the video when the cultural renewal and people being able to go back to country is a really important part. And the impacts of climate change mean that it's becoming more difficult. So I talked a bit about the lignum, but there were lots of things that were discussed both in Narran but also with the Worimi mob. That film was made during a cultural exchange, so the Worimi mob travelled to Narran. So they talked about they brought the mussels and the pippies with them. And it's obviously very different sort of things that they're facing on the coast. But one of the things was about middens, that because of East Coast lows, a lot of the middens on the coast are being destroyed. And within the community, like there's been a lot of discussion about what they wanted to do about that, and there has been some preventative work, but also some of the community wanted to just keep making middens, like basically make new ones and be able to have their cultural practices. It was interesting, Mona was talking before about what the community thought about having digital recordings. I don't think a community can be expected to want to do all the same things. It's about having a whole lot of options and having those discussions early on rather than waiting for, there's some storm and then suddenly the community gets consulted about, like, what do you want to do about this? There's been all this destruction. Like, to have those discussions early and decide what they want to do to prepare for that. And I think that's what the project's been about, is actually having those discussions early. So the work continues. There's been lots of ongoing surveys, and the Aboriginal community, like Joint Management Committee, and the local community have been involved in that. And as you would know, after the drought came the floods, but that's been good out there in terms of the water going back into the lake. And as you would know, there's been a very successful breeding season with all the water birds and lots of water. And then, just to end, Jason wanted you to see some footage of Narran. So thank you for listening to me, and I hope I've done justice to the presentation. And I think there'll be some questions afterwards, so after we look at this drone footage.
I think she did a very good job stepping into someone else's shoes. I'm impressed. I think what we will do is bring Maina, even though he's answered a few questions before, and Karen out, and we'll sit at the table over here for a bit of a Q&A session. One of the things that occurred to me in listening to both of those presentations is this idea of multiple strategies or multiple things that need to happen sometimes at once. So you can have your digital recording thing happening happily over here, but it's not solving a problem. It's actually, it's anticipating the worst, really. And it's not that you shouldn't do it, but you should be doing this other stuff as well. And that idea of choice, that communities choose what works for them. Did one of you want to have a few comments on that from your experience?
Yes, thank you for that comment. But it's coming from a small island state with very limited options and limited resources as well. That's why I made an earlier comment around whatever options that are on the table, and we feel that it will address the crisis, we should go for it. So despite the fact that we talk about the digital nation and other projects that are ongoing at the moment, but we should not also forget that there are a few other community initiatives that need to take into consideration to address not only the crisis, but that missing strand of the moral sequence of things that most of the time we tend to forget that this has a lot to do with the moral consequences and the moral obligations of people.
I know that many people probably work with communities as well, and there might be some other things that people want to share or add into the mix of things. Helen.
Karen, the adaptation pathways process is really interesting. And it has a sort of, we do this, but then if things change, we do something else. Could you talk a little bit more about that and the sort of things that might make the changes and the sort of things with regard to Narran or other examples of places that, that might be done in event of changes?
Yeah. So the process is, like I said, getting people to look at some of the values, and sometimes they're just examples to start the discussion, and then looking at what the risk is both now and in the future. And then we've come up with, when we were doing the work with National Parks, came up with a number of options, and some of that was like digital recording, or like at the worst case scenario, or it could be, I don't know, like just like shutting down a site, for example, during certain times. Like there's a whole range of things that can happen. But I guess the key was that it's really good for communities to make those decisions and to make them early, and so that they can actually start thinking about what they want to do, as I was saying earlier, rather than waiting for something to happen. And I guess the Middens is a good example because on the coast. Because, and not that there's any one answer, but you could have like digital recordings of middens because you know that they're going to be destroyed, but you can also have sandbanks and things that are actually preventing the destruction during a storm. Or you can be having cultural renewal and making sure that you're keeping on the practices that are making those middens. And so it's not about choosing any one option, but it's about being communities making a decision about what they want to do. And the key too is that not all the community is going to agree. Like people have really different opinions about what should be done, and that needs to be taken into account as well. And so perhaps it's doing a number of different pathways. And I guess that the thing with the pathways discussion has just enabled that discussion, yeah.
Anyone else have any questions for either of the two key speakers? This is your opportunity. We'll never get them in this room again. Elizabeth?
This is a question to my brother from Tuvalu. What would you suggest? What are some suggestions that you would say that is relevant and more applicable to the people of Tuvalu?
Yes, thank you so much for the question. The most applicable thing to do and wise in order to save not just Tuvalu but the small island states is to cut carbon emission. It's a big challenge because when we start talking about cutting down fossil fuel or phasing out fossil fuel, we are literally talking about economies of bigger countries, of industrialized countries. That is why it is a challenge for industrialized countries. But I think that's the only way out of this crisis, is to limit or cap the release of carbon dioxide. And that will definitely save countries like mine. And on the other hand, countries like Australia, the United States, and other industrialized countries, they have the technology, and they also have alternative ways of dealing with things, with structures, etc. So there is always an opportunity for them to come up with new alternative ways of dealing with the climate crisis. Because, climate change is to do with us, to do with human beings. So if it's to do with us, therefore we have the ability to change, because it's a lifestyle issue. And at the end of the day, we are the one impacted by climate change, paying the cost for climate change. And living in Tuvalu, and I have shown some of the photos and the clips of what does it mean to be in Tuvalu during a cyclone season. So I think the most applicable thing to do and wise to do is to cut down our carbon emission. Thank you.
Sorry, can I just one more question again? So apart from us all waiting for the political will and the power to say no to that, would you also think along the lines of mitigation? How would you safeguard the intangible cultural heritage of your indigenous people? Would you think that digital documentation of your mekkes, your culture, and all the practices, do you also think that's valuable, that you need to take forward to the next generation on the transmission of this knowledge?
Oh yes, definitely. We really need to, that's why at the outset I mentioned that the Digital Nation project is important, because we have all those options on the table to digitize not just our language, but also into intangible cultural activities. So in a worst case scenario, yes, of course, we need to not just to hold them in stories, but in a different form that will ensure the continuity and the usage of our intangible culture by our future generation, especially those who have opted to leave the country and make Australia and New Zealand their new home. I have experiences that with our families who reside in New Zealand, cousins and those who are living in New Zealand, of course, they tend to lose out the culture, and so it is very important that we digitize our cultural knowledge and heritage in order for the next generation to gain access to that. Thank you.
One of the things, while we're just getting the next speaker up, our next question up, is that one of the depressing things is that I remember asking someone from the Queensland government in the early 80s, when we were already feeling the impact of climate change in the Torres Strait, because Saibai Island's only about a metre above seawater, what's going to happen long term? Have you got a long-term plan? And we're thinking Queensland government, effectively the reserves were ended, but they were still running the reserves, the same people. And this guy turned around and said, oh yeah, of course we've got a plan. Of course we've got a plan. This is in 1982, I think. I said, oh, what's the plan? He said, relocation. So even though there's been that long lead time of knowledge there hasn't been any real action is the problem, you know, and we could have been doing something to solve this problem. Well, so the problem didn't develop.
Yeah, my name's Tracy. Just, I don't know if it's a question, but more so an observation and a comment. So my country is Mythica country, and it's in the Lake Eyre Basin region. And as a TO, and I'm a director as well, I've been going to geoscience meetings, and what they've been looking at is, you know, the capacity for mining in the Lake Eyre Basin region, and that's been a bit frightening. You know, we want to move away from coal and all that sort of stuff, but when they're looking at the new technologies and they need different critical minerals and environmental offsets. So, you know, we're also going to face another crisis within that if they're going to start mining in those areas as well, because we're just starting to find our cultural heritage and our stories by a lot of archaeological research happening out there. So that's a big issue that I brought up with Tanya Plibersek in one of the water reform meetings. And I said, you know, it's all well and good to say, oh, we're going to green energy, but you still need those minerals to create the green energy. So then, therefore, again, you know, us as Indigenous people are losing our lands again. We're being sort of raped and pillaged again. And it just seems like, you know, us Indigenous people miss out every time.
Anyone else? Helen?
Mine is also a question about to Karen, about the area around Narran and the effects upstream. Now, I'm aware that Narran is facing a double whammy, not only from climate change and loss of water, but also from a water allocation upstream to Cubby Station and other big enterprises. I'm aware there's been some water buyback that has flown into Narran. You may know about that, but Jason has talked about that to me. So I wondered if you might have some comments on that, if you know anything about that.
I'm sorry, I can't actually comment on that. I don't have enough knowledge about what's happening in the area. Apologies. You need Jason for that one.
Okay, that's fine. I guess one of the things that I think Elizabeth touched on in terms of Tuvalu is, out of all the work that you've been doing, and yours includes political action as well as working with communities, and yours is coming from a knowledge base of helping communities to get to decision making. What would you like to see most come from the work you do? Clearly, number one is turn off the power stations and stop the fossil fuel. But apart from that, what do you want to see? What is it? What's the best thing that could happen out of the work that you're doing?
For me personally, been doing this work for many years. I know it's fatigue, but it's important that despite the fact that we are tired of telling our story over and over again, we want to see some practical outcomes from the work that we do. Despite the many talks in the UN and other conferences, but I think simple things that we can do in order to affirm life continuity on the island, I think it's very important. Practical stuff, practical projects that will support communities, enhance their life, and also to respond to the crisis. We cannot compensate communities, but all we are asking is the fact that if we can put together the resources that we have in order for us to support communities, that does not want to leave their home islands. I think that is important. So, but I have seen in the past years, individuals and communities across the globe started to realize that we are all running out of time. So it's a good sign. It's a good sign that we are seeing people working closely with affected communities. It's not about research, it's not about academic stuff. It's about real stuff, real work that we are doing on the ground, and we need that support from the international community.
I wanted to reiterate, I guess, something that Jason thought was really important is to actually hand the baton on to the next generation as well, like to keep being mindful of what's happening and to hand the country back in better condition than what it is now. And then I think from my own perspective, I think it's great just to keep talking as well. Like I was talking earlier to Susan about I went to a heritage conference in 2018 in Europe, and there was only one workshop that mentioned climate change. So I think it's fantastic that ICOMOS is actually looking at this issue, and I think we need to do more of that. And finally, I think we need to take it seriously, like when Maina was talking earlier about the impacts, like these are people's lives, and you're asking people, please don't leave us behind. Like for Indigenous people, it's urgent. It's not just like, oh, we can wait and see what happens. And so I guess that's what I would like to see, is that we take some action, and doing this project has given me hope as well, because I can see that communities are feeling empowered and being able to make decisions for themselves, and that the work continues. Like there's a workbook that's coming out from the cultural science team, community climate change workbook, and so they're actually going to be working with communities to be able to have these discussions themselves, and that gives me hope.
Yes, if I may add, I was in Boiku and Saibai in the past few months, leading up to their legal case against the federal government. And the experience that I had from visiting Saibai and Boiku in the Torres Strait Islands is the fact that they are being supported by the government of Australia, despite the fact that they are going through all the climate crisis. But at the end of the day, they are being supported. And they have options on the table for them. They have access to the mainland. But in countries like mine, Tuvalu, Kiribati, and other few islands, it's difficult for us because we have very limited options on the table. And we don't have that much resources for us to respond. So that's what makes our case so unique when we talk about climate change in Tuvalu and Kiribati, because we don't have that much access. Say, for example, our brothers and sisters from Niue, from the Cook Island, they have access to New Zealand. They can just get up and leave the country. Tokelau, they have access to New Zealand as well. And many others, American Samoa, the northern part of the Pacific, access to the United States, because they are part of the territories of the United States. But for countries like Tuvalu and Kiribati, which are low-lying atolls, it is very difficult for us to comprehend and to see through what will be the future for people in Tuvalu and Kiribati.
Maina, could I just ask you to give a little bit of an explanation about what the case is against the Australian government from the Torres Strait Island areas you're talking about? Because I think there's a lot of people in this room from overseas that won't understand what's going on.
Thank you. Yes, The Boigu and Saibai communities in the Torres Strait Island took the federal government to court. Their argument was that they are doing very little on climate actions, but the outcome, I haven't followed the case lately, but that was the specific purpose of taking the federal government to court because of doing very little on climate change, especially in the context of Saibai and Boigu.
If people don't know, Saibai Island, which is fairly close to, I guess it's one of our closest islands to PNG, Papua New Guinea, is very flat, very low, and it gets totally inundated during wet season. Now, the main street is actually, it has a seawall, but the main street is often underwater, and they have the same sort of issue with salinity of their drinking water, rising salt levels and things like that. So while, of course, they are Australian citizens and can move to the mainland, some of the things you talked about, customary law and customary land ownership before, are still actually an issue in Australia as well. So after World War II, a number of people from Boigu and Saibai and other places did move to Australia. There are two versions of the story. Some say they did it themselves, made that decision themselves. There was a government person, though, surveying and building a place where they were going to go into a reserve, but for whatever was the motivation, they came after World War II because of a storm that had made it difficult and flooded salt water into their freshwater. And so some people chose or were encouraged by the government to move to the mainland. Others chose to stay, and at that stage they still could. There was still the option of being able to stay on that land. But in moving into the country, they then moved into mainland Aboriginal people's country. In a government-controlled system, this was possible, but wasn't necessarily negotiated. And so there have been long-term issues, even though people are interrelated now in family, there is, still underlying issues that result right back to that time and the movement of people into other people's country, just because of different practices, different stories, different protocols on the land, a whole range of things. So I think the loss of your culture, even if you're a citizen and can move to another place, that thing you talked about previously about losing that connection to the land where your ancestors are buried, I think stays very real for people, even though they do have citizens' rights, which is true, and that does make a big difference.
And it's, to add on to the discussion, is that we have witnessed quite a lot of cases that those who died in New Zealand and their will is to go back to be buried in the land in Tuvalu. And it's not something new. We have witnessed that, and I'm sure it's not just Tuvalu, but other Pacific Islands as well. They only went to New Zealand and Australia because of their kids, their children, who happens to have citizenship in New Zealand, but their will is to go back home and to be laid to rest. It's because of that connection between us and the land.
Any last questions,
Oh, sorry. Thank you, sorry. Hopefully it'll be quick. I just wanted to ask if either of you have a way of framing this discussion to people that maybe are less sympathetic or knowledgeable about climate change. What would you say to somebody that would compare, people that are forced to move from their lands or have a loss of land or culture from climate change to something like a lower socioeconomic person being priced out of the suburb that they've grown up in? People that conflate these two different sort of mechanisms in a way that justifies their own actions. How do you frame that sort of discussion to them to make them understand why this is so important?
Oh, I guess I'm just going to answer this as somebody working with community, and just that I think it's about listening to what their issues are and what they find difficult, and having some understanding and connection about that. Like, it's not to dismiss their concerns. I think that's the most important thing. Yeah, and I think trying to help people to have some empathy and maybe some connections with the similarities that people experience especially from some of the impacts of climate change, like some of the things I was talking about with, hotter climate. Like, that's going to affect all the communities out in Western New South Wales, not just Aboriginal communities. Yeah.
I think too, just one comment. I always think it's a problem when people start to make these things as if they're oppositional. So the fact that people who've lived their entire life in an area with social housing, for instance, and the property value goes up and they get forced out and move somewhere else, is wrong. But it's not comparable to the other thing, which is also wrong. So I think we've got to be really careful of being pushed into this idea that these things are oppositional. That we could put our money here or we could put our money there. Sometimes we need to put our money in more than one place. We need to put our action in more than one place. So we don't have to really, say to a person kicked out of social housing and move to some boondocks somewhere that what's happening to them is right or less important or anything. We just have to recognise that this is a real issue, I think. I think Elizabeth had a talk and then...
Thank you. It seems to me that a lot of the things that need to be done need to be to make the places where people live now more viable again. As I recall, I don't remember what the conference was called, but the last international UN conference on climate change in Indonesia, there was a resolution that passed about making the wealthier nations pay reparations to the nations that are most affected by climate change. Has that progressed since then, to your knowledge, and are the Pacific nations involved in that movement and in being able to follow that through and share some of the proceeds that the international community of affected nations put at that time to be able to get more funding that way?
It is not new to have those kind of commitments from the UN. We are literally fed up of all those UN resolutions and different processes that the UN will take to buy them time and to drag the whole discussion. So it's not new. Even the commitment to the 100 billion commitment, the UN have made so much resolution and passed so many resolutions, but at the end of the day, those who are affected by the climate crisis remain impacted. So sometimes we lose hope, but we need to continue to hold them accountable for what they do, the industrialized countries, and speak truth to power. I think that is more important.
Is this a loss and damage fund? That was COP27. The loss and damage fund, I think that's what you're talking about. Yeah, that was COP27 in 2022. So I think that resolution passed, but I don't think that has been established yet.
Yeah, that's right. The loss and damage standalone facility fund that was passed in Scotland. Is it COP27? COP26? Oh, okay, yeah. So there are many UN resolutions around climate change, but yes, but if you assess the process or processes that the UN are taking, it will take forever. Even that loss and damage facility fund, it's already been passed, but now we'll start talking about the modalities of the funds, how the fund's going to look like. So definitely in the next 10 or 20 years, that fund will come into place. It's not like the UN will pass something today and happen in the next 2 or 3 years. It will take a long time to.
Sorry, just a comment. I think on behalf of all the Pacific nations, I think there's a topic I find that's missing a lot, the intangible cultural heritage. This needs to marry with DRR or DRM. And just like the video we watched, our ancestors, if you're talking about science, they were the best scientists. They could tell the indicators in nature. They go to their plantations. I normally give my speeches and I say, they don't have a smartphone, they don't have a flat screen TV, but they go to the plantation. They'll see all the indicators in nature if there's bad weather coming. So we need to mitigate. We need to speak about this. We need to talk about this, whether it needs validation on ICH practices to fit the jargon to the scientific, no offense to all the scientists, but indigenous knowledge is valid. Trust me, it works. I've done so much research and it's valid. And some of our communities are so far reached out, we cannot reach them even by telephone or mobile, but they see the indicators in nature. So these two need to marry. We need to be talking about these topics. It's relevant, it's actual, it's factual for us in the Pacific, and we base most of our research around those areas now. So just a comment, Naka.
Malo, yes, and I also wish to point out that India is in the room as well. A colleague of mine, we've been working closely in the past many years on traditional knowledge, and especially pushing for the LCIPP, the Local Communities and Indigenous Peoples Platform under the UNFCCC. So we've been working closely with India and a few other colleagues in the Pacific to ensure that local communities and indigenous knowledge have a say within the UN processes. So as my sister Elizabeth pointed out, just before I left for New Zealand last week, I was driving with my son, my 12-year-old son, and I pointed out to him about the moon. I was telling him it will be a low pressure next week. If it not, probably a cyclone or probably and then he was like, "Dad, how did you know that?" I said, "Oh, my dad told me in 2015 when we were struck by the wave the clip that I showed. I was also with my dad and he told me, 'Have you seen that moon before?' I said, 'No.' Both sides of the moon were facing up. Those two sides were really, because normally it tilts. But that night, it was facing up. And he said 2 to 3 days, either a cyclone or a wave. And then we were struck by a wave. When I was in New Zealand, after 3 days, when I told my son about the wave, about something will happen, and then it was announced over radio and the media in Tuvalu that there is a cyclone in Tuvalu, low pressure near Fiji. So these are some of the things that even we look into the breadfruit tree, if we start seeing that they're bearing 4 breadfruits, it indicates that in the next few months or so, there will be a cyclone. There's so many indicators that tells us. But, my friends, if climate change continues, it will change the weather pattern, and it will change our traditional knowledge as well. So we really need to mitigate. We really need to do something before it's too late.
Thank you, and my question is to Mania again. Yes, we need to address the emissions, but that waka won't turn around very quickly. And I can't imagine what it would be like to be, say, your son or a kid in Tuvalu in the cyclone season coming up. What can we do to support the children who are there, who might be living in fear of the cyclone seasons? What can we do about that? In the meantime, while addressing emissions? Kia ora.
Yes, we can do a lot, but the problem is that we are not controlling the narrative. The narrative is totally controlled by the West and the industrialized countries. So it is difficult for us to forecast at this point in time because we don't have any control of the climate narrative. All we can do is to mobilize very limited resources that we have, especially to bounce back and use our traditional knowledge to navigate our way forward. But yes, of course, it is a very scary situation for us living in the islands, especially during cyclones. But what can we do?
So I'm from Belgium, so we are the ones that are making a lot of carbon dioxide. No, what I feel also from the discussions about yesterday is that there is a lot we in Europe can get from what's happening here, or the understanding. One of them is, for example, what was just referred to is about this attention, this understanding of the nature, this connection between place and people, and the reading of nature. And at the same time, in Europe, I don't know if you follow a little bit about the Green Deal, that's one thing, but there's also this initiative which is called the new Bauhaus, which is basically an initiative which was responding to the fact that we have lost this kind of connection with our environment. And so I think things which work on the long run are win-wins. So just a suggestion could be, is there not a way to make connections between local communities here and communities in Europe, so that there is an understanding about what is happening here, but at the same time share this knowledge and share these practices, which are so rich and which are not that we sometimes probably had also in the past, but we lost it in the way we looked at civilization, and make this kind of connections, because if that can happen also through schools or things like that, that will generate a very strong empathy from children to their parents and say, oh, but you should not use, you should change to this, or you should change your behavior. So I think there is win-win in many, but I think this is something we should try to look for, and particularly referring to this connection between people and place and traditional knowledge. I think there is a lot that we can gain in Europe from your experiences. And I think there is something that can be coming in return, or that could give pressure on the societies in the north to reduce their consumption.
I'm glad that you mentioned civilization, because I think this is what destroyed our connection between us and the environment. You know, when the colonizers came to the Pacific, they told us that we need to do away with the environment. We need to move away, because the closer we are to the environment, the uncivilized we are, the unpalangi we are. So we need to move away from the environment, from nature, in order for us to be civilized. That's when we start developing the land and stuff. But I think, if I hear you correctly, I think it is very important that you pointed out that we really need to revisit, to go back and rebuild that connection we had in the past with the environment, with nature, in order for us to systematically respond to the climate crisis.
But the thing I want to point out with the example of the new Bauhaus and the Green Deal is that now in Europe there is this understanding of this impact of what you call civilization, and that we have to turn something back. So I think this is the momentum, And it's of course partially related to the climate change and to many other things. But I think there is a real understanding in Europe, and I cannot speak for other parts of the world, but that this connection is lost and we need it, but we don't know how. So you can help us with that. I think that's important, because then you create win-wins.
So maybe what he's suggesting is it's a sort of hope of a fertile ground now in Europe for the understanding to grow about what's happening in the Pacific. I mean, sometimes I think we forget how far away we are from each other. What's happening in the Pacific probably has no real impact on Europe. So Elizabeth is dying to say something there.
Sorry. Just one more thing I'd like to share to everyone is an excellent example was the COVID-19. Look at what it did to the whole world. Say, for example, for us back at home, white-collar job earners all lost their jobs, basically, like most of them. And whether they were living in the city or the suburbs, they had to go back to the village. But they survived. They lived from the sea, they planted their food, and it just went back to, like my brother said, let's look back. So they survived and they managed till everybody went back to work. Not everybody went back to work, but look at that. That's traditional Naka.
Malo.
Kia ora. I'm Justina from the Cook Islands. I just wanted to echo what Elizabeth has said, because for all of us I'm sure for all of us in the Pacific, we rely heavily on our traditional knowledge. And to an extent that we teach our young ones to look out for signs. And the signs are always there, whether it's in the sky, on land, and practically most children know of this. But the danger that we have now is that our children is really influenced through Western life, education. So what we are trying to do at the Ministry of Culture in the Cook Islands is to try and document all these traditional knowledge so that our children have something to base on. I feel that climate change is everyone's business. So we need, like somebody was saying, we need to talk about it. But we can't get away from our traditional knowledge, our indigenous knowledge. We need to pass it on. For us at home, we've had so many cyclones, so we've learned a lot. We've learned of the science. And like Elizabeth was saying, when COVID hit the Cook Islands and many islands, everybody went back to planting. So although some lost their jobs in government, they made more money out of making use of the land, going back to traditional ways. Thank you.
Yes, we'll just have a response here for that, and then
I agree. I hope that my presentation and the video was also talking about that the traditional knowledge is really important. I just had a thought too of something that I hadn't mentioned because I was talking about Naren is they talk about policy windows, like opportunities that happen because of disasters. With our recent bushfires and all the terrible fires that happened in 19 and 20, which kind of got a bit lost in all the COVID and everything else. But one of the good things that's come out of that is a recognition of cultural burning and the traditional knowledge about Aboriginal people being able to take care of country with cool burning. That's not about hazard reduction. It's actually about caring for country so that those sorts of really fierce fires don't happen. And and finally, like a lot of the traditional firefighting organisations are actually trying to learn from traditional owners and from Aboriginal people about how they cared for the Australian landscape. And so I think that's quite a good thing that's come out of a disaster, actually.
Yes, I'm from New Caledonia. I must say I'm pretty proud that the last few people have been all Pacific Islanders. I wanted just to follow up on what our colleagues from Belgium was saying about reconnecting. So as head of ICOMOS Pacifica, I wanted to remember that this place today is in relation to the General Assembly of ICOMOS International. And ICOMOS International has two bodies. UNESCO has two bodies of expertise, one related to culture, ICOMOS, and one related to nature, IUCN. In the Pacific, the division between nature and culture is nonsense. Sorry to use that term. I mean, the two are culturally embedded, one with the other, since forever. Maybe to bounce on what the colleague from Europe was saying, maybe this place, this General Assembly, might be a time to not just talk about relation between nature and culture and how ICOMOS and IUCN could work closely together, blah, 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 and getting back into a plane and just having other meetings, but maybe thinking as we are in the Pacific, in the Southern Hemisphere, maybe thinking about how can we move forward in terms of UNESCO to start really getting culture and nature together. Because I think from what I've heard, this is the future. And dividing them remains of the past, of one civilization, whatever you want to call it, against other ways of thinking about civilization. And so I would really be interested during the next week, maybe to have some sort of people meeting and trying to see how we can not kind of bureaucracy, I mean, as meetings as things have been going over for the last 15 years, I've seen it, but how can we really move forward as Pacific Islanders or other people from other regions of the world about kind of pressing UNESCO to make something of marriage between nature and culture, because this is, I believe, what is really needed for the future of UNESCO, of ICOMOS, and of IUCN. Oleti.
I'm very thankful for being here. I am Ave, representative of Finno-Ugric nations from Europe, Estonia. And I'm actually glad to say that not all traditional knowledge is lost in Europe. Next to me is a person from Norway, where traditional knowledge is specifically Sami indigenous knowledge is very respected. And being the part of Finno-Ugric family, where only of more than 30 nations, only 3 have their own countries. It was in 2019 when we made a resolution of cultural importance and cultural rights as is it important in environmental protection. And it is a hot topic in Europe as well as all over the world. And United Nations rapporteur report on the cultural rights specifically again mentioned the importance of traditional knowledge and heritage as it comes to the future, and that small island states and coastal nations are most threatened, and they are most threatened in North Europe too, because being part of North Europe, our plus is +6 now. So it is really immense change, and there it is exactly the exchange of knowledge between indigenous North and indigenous South is very important. Thank you again for being here. It has been a real pleasure so far.
Thank you very much. There is 2 minutes left for any final words. Nick, yours way too short. We've done 2 minutes, way too much. Way too much. All right. So, did you want to make a quick response? One more? Chrissy.
Hi, Sue. Hi, thank you very much for your presentations. As the conversations and questions have been going on, I've been itching to answer some of them. My traditional country is the wet tropics, rainforest. We have real concerns about climate change. Yes, it'll affect people, and it is affecting some of our heritage sites, but it also affects our totem species. So, you know, when a species gets up in the mountaintops, they've got nowhere else to go. And so, you know, we're looking at measures and that to try and connect. But then if the ranges are all at that same level, they're only moving from one peak to the other. And there's so much loss that we've had from our totemic species. And they have such cultural significance to the people that are in that area. The other thing is that, you know, sort of the seasons that are coming, we believe it's going to be really hot and dry. And so our biggest fear is having a big fire, for instance, through a wet tropics region. And that, you know, sort of historically has always been a wet tropics because we get the monsoons and rains and that through there. And you know, sort of being Torres Strait Islander as well, what Sue was talking about before with, you know, sort of islands being inundated by the sea. They did have sea walls. The sea just went over the wall. But sea is also in their houses as well, and you've got to get in a dinghy and row your boat to the neighbour's place, you know. So we're affected by that up there as well. But just for the last speaker, I mean, I've forgotten all the answers to the other ones now, but the last speaker, we are trying to do that through an organisation called the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on World Heritage, and there will be, I'll just put a plug, I'm doing keynote on Tuesday, and we have been working with UNESCO and the advisory bodies to try and fill that gap, or, you know, sort of address the gap between nature culture and looking at how Indigenous people's values and traditional knowledge and all of that can be, you know, sort of very useful and really build a more holistic picture about what is in a, you know, a World Heritage area and that sort of thing. So, yeah, I'll leave it at that. And there will be sessions with advisory bodies and UNESCO, I believe.
Sorry, Auntie, can you just say the name of that organisation again, please?
It's the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on World Heritage.